Every account of the first Trump presidency, based on first-hand reports from those that were there, attests to the complete mess that was Donald Trump in office, mitigated only by the fact that there were so-called adults in the room. People with some degree of experience of government, of foreign policy, of security practices, etc., who could often talk the president out of his maddest ideas before they were turned into reality. And that's a healthy leadership setup generally, not because any leader should be accepting the advice on every single occasion, but they should have their ideas challenged, the facts of the case made visible, so decisions are made in full knowledge of possible consequences. Now, of course, we all know that things are different this time. Trump 2.0. We all know that Trump hired the most slavish sycophants for the key roles. There was an absurd loyalty test required of anyone who would be seriously considered, and as a result, there are precious few adults in the room. A number of us thought and hoped for, in spite of the obstacles, there could be a couple of adults in the room. People who decided to navigate the initial obstacles through a sense of public service, knowing that they could only exercise influence if they were in the room, and that the ends somehow justified the means. Well, 6 months in, I have to say I am coming to the conclusion that no, there are no adults in that particular room. And we've seen this in the aftermath of Trump's decision to fire the head of the Labour Bureau Statistics Department, Erica McIntyre, because he didn't like the bad news the Bureau was giving him. As we discussed here a couple of days ago, a decision that now threatens to completely undermine how reliable government data will be held to be by investors and everyone else in the rest of the world. Most of the financial community saw this as a huge deal, a massive mistake, the sort of moment when you would most have wanted one of the fabled adults in the room to do some sort of avoidance or mitigation. Instead, we saw people slavishly lining up to endorse Trump's latest fantasy in the most humiliating ways possible. J.D. Vance, for instance, who, when the Labour report first came out, showing plunging jobs growth, well, he seized on one detail that he could present as positive, the fact that the data showed an increase in jobs amongst US-born residents specifically. That was a win, he suggested. Then, of course, Trump had his meltdown, fired the head of the Bureau, and suddenly Vance's approval of the Bureau's data was done and forgotten, with him quickly coming out to say he was completely aligned with President Trump and was glad to see him dismiss the BLS commissioner. But let's be clear, this was one of the biggest red lines you can possibly get. Nobody who knows the field believes the data had been fixed or politically influenced in any way, and everyone who knows the field understands why having data that can be widely trusted is essential to the success of the US economy and its role in the world. And yet none of them were prepared to defend this. So the director of the White House National Economic Council, Kevin Hassett, he admitted to Meet the Press that he could not substantiate the president's claims the data had been manipulated. Well, of course he couldn't. He gave this explanation for the events. The president wants his own people there, so that when we see the numbers, they're more transparent and more reliable. But the whole point of the Bureau's independence is so that the numbers are more transparent and reliable because they are kept away from political interference. The idea they would magically become more so in President Trump's hands specifically, it's simply laughable. Jamieson Greer, the US Trade Representative, he joined the president in criticising the Bureau, although he could only bring himself to critique the Bureau's use of revisions. He's experienced enough to know that that's a normal part of a process where you have an interest in getting both timely data, but then also improving it with the more accurate data as that comes in. But no, he went on to CBS's Face the Nation, he faced the nation, and he told them it was all a bit terrible. And then he added, and it's, the president is the president. He can choose who works in the executive branch. Yes, but he's mostly choosing monkeys. So is that a problem or not? Well, no point asking the monkeys. Others were simply absent. Scott Bessent is often looked to as possibly one of those only adults in the room, possibly more through hope than expectation. Well, what did he have to contribute here? Nothing. Clearly wasn't in a hurry to publicly comment and associate himself with the decision, but equally, he clearly had not used his authority to seek to block it. Keeping his position and good standing in the White House overrode any such considerations. Well, there's no point being the secret adult in the room if all you ever do is to pretend to be one of the children. The next test will be to see who Trump selects to replace McIntyre. Stephen Farnsworth, political science professor at the University of Mary Washington, said this: "The key question for the Congress is to what extent will they insist on a competent professional to be confirmed for this position going forward?" What, you mean like they did with the elevation to the Court of Appeals of Trump's personal lawyer and slavish acolyte Emil Bove, the man who was so astonishingly disqualified from being considered suitable material for such a lifetime appointment, mind? His confirmation hearing can only stand really as the final testament that Congress has wholly lost its power to be a system brake on malpractice. None of this should be a surprise, as even those parts of the executive branch that were supposed, in system terms, to operate as adults in the room, have become nothing of the sort. The Justice Department, for instance, traditionally operated at arm's length from the presidency, focused on serving the public by prosecuting the law without fear nor favour, able to say no to Trump when he wants something that is not within the normal bounds. Now, by current reports, they're saying of a crisis in the American legal system, of judges have found that Trump's Justice Department has repeatedly tried to mislead them, lie to them, to ignore or violate their orders, and to turn around and then attack them in public if they rule against them. Judges are now coming to the conclusion that the Justice Department doesn't give two beans about, the law. It's simply trying to get the outcomes that the president wants using any and all tactics that might work. Stephen Vladek, a law professor with Georgetown University, told the New York Times this: "I think people don't fully appreciate how much the ability of the legal system to work on a daily basis rests on the government's credibility. Without that credibility, it's going to be harder for the government to do anything in court, even ordinary things. All of a sudden, you're going to have courts second-guessing things that they wouldn't have before. This could bring the entire system to a grinding halt, because if government lawyers end up having to prove every single statement, however trivial that they make, every time they go to court, because there is zero trust of competence or professionalism on their part, they will find that a massive constraint in the future. So you mean actions have consequences? Colour me shocked." Not only are all the political appointees spineless enablers for this most authoritarian US presidency in living memory, but most of the high-quality public servants in many of the key departments, those are the ones who are being fired most quickly. As an example of the latter, Jen Easterly, who was the former director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, she was latterly in a senior teaching position at the US Military Academy. But conspiracy theorist Laura Loomer, the one who believes that the deep state can create hurricanes for reasons unspecified, she posted that Easterly was a Biden-era mole. No evidence for that, obviously, and none required, because Loomer has a lot of sway in the White House, so Easterly was sacked from her job soon afterwards, gone. Pentagon chief spokesman Sean Parnell was quick to justify it, saying, "We are not turning cadets into censorship activists," as though she'd been caught doing that. And we know this is just one of many, many people who were skilled and experienced, and they're serving their country, the sort of people you would expect to see there if hiring was being done on merit. More than a dozen high-ranking officials have been amongst the cull, many of those because of Luma, who has said that she predicts there are hundreds more still to be purged if she has her way. Jen Easterly posted about her situation on LinkedIn. It's worth quoting some specific segments that I think go very effectively to the heart of where America, and some other places as well maybe, are right now. So she talks a bit about her career as a lifelong independent, but then says this isn't about her, it's about something larger. And she says this: it's about the sacred trust we place in those who wear the uniform, and the damage threatened when that trust is eroded by partisanship, when outrage is weaponized and truth discarded. It tears at the fabric of unity and undermines the very ethos that draws brave young men and women to serve and sacrifice. Duty, honour, country. We must guard against the corrosive force of division and stand firm in defence of these values that should bind us together. It's also about what we teach the next generation, about moral courage, judgment, and most importantly, character. And she went on with the most powerful part. Every member of the long grey line knows the cadet prayer. It asks that we choose the harder right instead of the easier wrong. In boardrooms and war rooms, in quiet moments of doubt, and in public acts of leadership, the harder right is never easy. That's the whole point. Well, it's entirely to be expected that such people find they don't have a place under the current administration. President Trump crafted his selection process to weed out all but the slavishly loyal to him. He and the MAGA movement attained their current position precisely by weaponizing those corrosive forces of division and partisanship. And not a single one of the whole lot of them have shown even once in the last 6 months they have the character or the courage to follow the harder right instead of the easier wrong. Are they waiting for the right time? Well, when will the right time come? Surely before you fire all the people who are skilled and qualified and motivated by service to their country. Well, no, apparently not, because many of those have now gone. How about before the president has permanently damaged America's essential alliances and motivated the majority of the world to start planning around it, like one gives a wide berth to a rabid dog? No, too late. Damage done, and not a whimper was to be heard. So, no, there are no adults in the room, no one pursuing the harder right. The best you've got are some people like Scott Bessent, who have the intellectual capacity to know better, but in reality that only gets deployed to provide more persuasive post-rationalizations of whatever mad thing the president just decided to do. Or indeed Sean Parnell post-rationalizing the firing of Jen Easterly. It's aptly described as the easier wrong. And remember it. Because I guarantee this, after all of these events are played out, there will be so many people swearing that they were never really in on it, they were only just doing their bit behind the scenes to try to make it less bad. Well, I'm sorry, but no, they weren't. Not this lot. Remember what Jen Easterly said: moral courage, judgment, character. The people with those are the ones who are being fired. Well, I trust that all other potential employers will recognise that the fact of being fired by this shower is a badge of honour, and that they are snapping them up so that in some form or another they can continue to make their contribution.